a combination of mechanistic and vitalistic. Okay, I'm not going to get into those, but I will tell you. And again, it doesn't make it better than another technique. It's just a matter of history. I just want to give you some history trivia here. The very first technique of second century chiropractic happened to be torque release technique. It was around March of 1995 that it debuted on campus at Life, at that time, Life College. Today it's Life University. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on technique. And that's because that's going to ruin the whole idea of the tonal model. The tonal model has nothing to do with technique. And technique has nothing to do necessarily with the tonal model. I'll give you an example. You've heard the word spirituality. Okay? Spirituality stands on its own merit. Almost all religions embrace spirituality, but spirituality does not need any religion or religiosity. It stands on its own merit. So the same thing here. The tonal model is a form of basic science. I mean, today, back in the old days, it was a big deal, okay? But today, it's basic science. Further, a tonal model doesn't have to be a technique, and a technique doesn't have to be based on a tonal model. But back full circle now, we're hoping that all new techniques that come forward from 1995 on, until, of course, the third century, the beginning of the third century, hopefully will be tonal. It's going to be up to you to be able to discover which is what. So you have to stop coming up to your friends or fellow chiropractors, my technique's tonal, because it probably isn't. If it's any first century technique, and those are the great ones, like Thompson, Diversified, Van Rump, Palmer upper cervical, Nuka, Atlas orthogonal, Blair, for the upper cervical techniques. And by the way, upper cervical techniques and full spine techniques, they're all valid chiropractic techniques and they all work. And of course, you have Logan, you have Gonstead. These have stood the test of time. They're the more commonly known techniques of first century, but there's over 300. And the reason for that is that chiropractic techniques were not allowed to change. First century techniques are not allowed to change. Okay? And that still remains the case today. So now a second century model, another difference is that techniques that now come forward in second century chiropractic should try to change with new incoming research that would either support what's in that technique, shut it down, make it better, whatever way. But in other words, that the thousands and thousands of research papers that are published every year should have some influence to make what's coming out and being developed more better, right? Okay, well, first century techniques were not allowed to do that. And I was hoping that second century techniques would allow that. And as I sit here today, okay, and this is the end of 2024 going on to 2025, the only technique that is constantly changing and amending itself based on fresh incoming research to make it better is torque release technique. So I like to think of second century techniques not only should be tonal, and not only should be nonlinear and vitalistic, okay, but should be upgradable. In other words, they don't stay stuck in time. Like first century techniques are not allowed to change. Yet we claim we're a science. So I'm sharing these things with you because it's going to be up to you what you're going to choose to use in your offices as far as a technique or technique model. Okay, does it make sense to create a technique that 200 years from now stayed the same and hasn't improved, changed, or kept up with the incoming research? Well, I'll let you figure that out. Of course, if you're a science, we're philosophy, science, and an art. The art we understand. That's the application of the model. Okay? The philosophy, hopefully we get that, or even allow that to be a part of our practice. Okay, but the science, what makes it a science? That has to be something that's reproducible and founded on research, and it should always be changing. So torque release is more of a model than a technique, meaning that it's like a computer upgrade. And I'm not here, again, to teach you technique or to promote torque release, but it's a good example of what should benefit all of us. And that is, if you understand torque release not as a technique, but as a model, that means you'd be able to still practice Gonstead, Palmer upper cervical, any technique, upper cervical, full spine, first century, second, it doesn't matter. You can still practice it because they all work. But what I'd like you to do is consider upgrading it to a torque release model, meaning that it's going to constantly upgrade and change, and you'll be ahead of the game. And your outcomes will be better and better as improvements take place. Okay. So when we talk about the tonal model, I think now you have, and I kept it as basic with comparisons and representations that are beyond simple. I could make it very complex. That being said, are there any questions about the tonal model? In other words, Gonstead is a great technique, but it's not a tonal model. Could you add the tonal model to Gonstead? Yes, if you had an upgrade model. Well, right now, the only one that exists is torque release. As I said before, you would hope that second century techniques would also include models and be open to change. That's not happening. So what questions do you have right now?
We have some.
Well,
we have some questions.
I hope we have some.
We have some questions.
Dr.
J, we have some questions online that I would like to.
Excellent. I can only answer the ones in Portuguese.
Monica Miller from Argentina asked, at what frequency does a subluxation vibrate?
It's going to be 64 hertz or the law of double. 64, then double 64, then double that and double that. Would have to be whatever the number would have to be a common denominator of 64 hertz, the fundamental abnormal frequency. So 64 hertz is the frequency of neurological pathology or neurological insult. I want everybody to listen to that term. Neurological insult is also a way to cause nerve interference to fall to an abnormal frequency. Okay? That's the answer to her question.
So the other question from Cesar Reynoso Cesar Reynoso. Well, Cesar has more than one question.
Are we going to allow that?
Let me go for that. Are tone and innate synonymous?
What?
Are tone and innate, is innate the synonymous of tone?
No. Innate and tone are two different things. That's why I tried to keep it simple. Tone is expressed in hertz frequency. Okay? Like C on the piano. C on the piano is very close to 64 hertz, by the way. Okay? Innate is not a frequency. Innate is not a frequency. So I'm going to define innate now because in answering her question, it would be appropriate. Now, that's another thing too. Everybody goes around and saying innate. We all use innate in a sense, and you haven't got an idea of how to explain it or what it is. Oh, it's the natural, this, garbage. So who am I going to use as, I'm not going to give you my definitions. I don't do that. I'm going to give you B.J. Palmer's definition of innate. You'll find it in the Green Book, The Science of Chiropractic, 1920. There's 4 or 5 different green books called The Science of Chiropractic. Each one is by the year. This is 1920. I believe it's page 159. The very first sentence on the top of the page on the right-hand side, with the book open, it says, the mind, the soul, spirit, the nature, intuition, and the subconscious mind, or as I prefer to name it, the innate intelligence. He doesn't say innate intelligence, the innate intelligence. Okay? So I'll repeat that again. The mind, the soul, spirit, nature, the mind, the soul, spirit, nature, intuition, the subconscious mind, or as I prefer to name it, the innate intelligence. That is the definition of innate, according to B.J. Palmer.
Great. Thank you, Doc. Now, Cesar Reynoso also, 2 questions. Cesar Reynoso, the same guy.
Oh, okay.
3 questions. He's going on to the 3rd one, which is a good thing. Gracias, Cesar. Do tonal techniques are the only ones to generate patterns?
Are the only to generate what? Oh.
Can tonal techniques? Let me try to. I'm doing my best.
I think her question is: are tonal techniques immune from making a pattern? Because I assume tonal techniques are more better, therefore you won't pattern your patient. Is that her question?
I think you're understanding the question better than I am.
Okay, so the answer to that is no. A tonal technique is not safer than a non-tonal technique in avoiding patterns, because it's not that's the issue. First of all, patterns are bad. As a matter of fact, subluxation is a pattern. Okay. Again, I don't want to spend too much on technique because we have so much more to talk about, and I have to leave here a few minutes.
25 minutes.
Really? That's because you want to play safe. Okay. In other words, he wants me to get out of here because
there's only 4. There's only 4 ships on the Old San Juan dock.
It's amazing. He goes to pick me up at the ship. He says, "What's the name of the ship?" I said, "The Breakaway." This is the only ship that I've seen in the history of ships. I didn't know this until he said, "Oh, I can't find it," because the name's not on the front. Every ship has the name on the front. Not this ship. You know why? It's a 2nd century ship. It says Peter Max on the front. So you'd think the name of the ship is Peter Max. Never mind. Okay. Pattern. We were taught in school, all chiropractic school.
Dr. J, my apologies, because he's clarifying with a term. He's using the term CPGs, central pattern generators. He brought up that term.
Could you say that slowly? That sounds too scientific for me.
CPGs, central pattern generators, is brought up by Cesar. I'm assuming he's clarifying his original question.
Okay. Let's keep it simple for everybody because most people have never heard of that. Is it safe to say that when he says pattern, is that when we're taught in chiropractic school that everybody has to have a pattern, because of weak places in the spine, that when you're going to blow a subluxation, it's always going to be in the same place. Is that what he means? Forget the equipment. Who cares about the equipment?
Yeah. Cesar's going to have to clarify his question.
Let me just say this because the cat's out of the bag. We'll get back to his SPGXYZ in a minute. We were taught in chiropractic school that everybody has their pattern. That Alejandro over here, okay, that's his subluxation pattern. And Mary over here, okay, she has a subluxation pattern. It's different, but it's hers. And you were probably told the reason. Sometimes you weren't even told the reason, but most of the reasons that are given is because based on asymmetrical facets and gravity and weight bearing, we're going to blow out, or we're going to blow a subluxation, always that same listing in the same place, the same way in that particular person. So to me, that's what a pattern means when I'm asked this type of question. It is unfortunately taught to you by sincere teachers and faculty, but they don't know what they're talking about. Okay? It all started because after BJ died and the open rooms were taken apart at Palmer and Davenport, and now you had an individual table per room, no longer could you make an adjustment to the primary, go to the next table, adjust that, go to the next table, and come back around. And after a certain amount of time, the patient would retrace and they would have a new subluxation. Okay, so the rumor was spread that everyone has their pattern. To make up for the mistakes that they were making, they were creating patterns in their own patients. And in the early days, they knew they were. They didn't want to. But they came up with this as an answer to make it sound like, well, it's okay because you're supposed to have a pattern anyway. Today, I believe that we're taught this with sincerity. In the old days, originally, they knew they were lying. So today, they're sincere, but they're wrong. No one's supposed to have a pattern if they're getting adjusted. The subluxation itself is sometimes defined as a stuck pattern. Again, I don't want to get too much into techniques, and I'll make this short. Patients, human beings, do not have subluxation patterns unless the chiropractor put them there. Subluxation patterns are patterns of subluxations where the patient comes in and it's always pretty much the same thing to adjust, visit after visit, okay, is inappropriate, and it only occurs because you as a chiropractor created that pattern in your patient. You didn't intentionally do that. As a matter of fact, you think you're doing a good job. You don't even recognize that you've done it because you've been told to expect it. But again, I'm not brief, but I'm going to be very brief here. The only reason, the only way, the only method that you can create a pattern, a subluxation pattern in your patient, is simply because you have not differentiated a primary from a secondary subluxation. If you only adjust primary subluxations, you'll never create a pattern. If you adjust secondary or tertiary subluxations, and they're real subluxations, you will create a pattern. Once you create a pattern, well, let me ask you this. So what? You created a pattern. So I'm going to ask myself, Jay, what's wrong with having a pattern anyway? I mean, it's a pattern of subluxations. Well, what's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. Patient can never retrace. Retracing means that patient lies down on the table. The average amount of subluxations on any human, according to 100 years of research, is around 10. In other words, if you don't adjust anything and you just go around finding the subluxations in the person who's on the table, okay, when you're done, you probably have 10 subluxations. Only one of them is the primary, because the definition of the primary is it's a double definition. Primary subluxations are caused by chemical, mental, and physical insult. Secondary subluxations and tertiary subluxations are not created. They are real subluxations, but they're not caused by chemical, mental, or physical insult. They are responsive. They're the compensatory subluxation to get rid of the primary. So only the primary subluxation is caused by chemical, mental, and physical. The minute that manifests, you have a primary subluxation, the body then creates around 8 or 9 secondary and tertiary subluxations to mitigate the primary. If there's no primary, there's no secondaries. So here's what happens. Patient lies down on the table. You're probably no longer able to, or you're not using techniques that differentiate the difference between a primary and a secondary. That was lost a long time ago because it was intended to be lost when that open room was torn down and you only have one table in the room. So now you adjust what you think is the most significant, the primary subluxation, if you don't want to call it that, the subluxation you think you're supposed to adjust. Now the body accepts and holds it and then processes it out and goes to subluxation heaven. Okay, now there's 8 or 9 more secondary and tertiary because it's going to take 20 minutes once that primary is gone for the secondaries and tertiaries to go away. In other words, remember I said it's a process, 3 steps, accepts and holds the adjustment, that takes a certain amount of time. And then second step is to process it. Well, historically, we used to be told that it takes about 20 minutes. Patients would go into a resting room. Okay, but it wasn't they went into a resting room. That's misunderstood. In an open room, they just stayed on the table. And by the time you came back, okay, now the next primary was available. So wait a second, Jay. You said there can only be one primary. Where'd this next primary come from? That's the retracing. So again, patients on the table, they have a layer, let's say, of these 10 subluxations. Only one's the primary. The other 9 are the secondaries and tertiaries. Okay? Now, you did a good job. You didn't adjust any secondaries. You only adjusted the primary. And if the body now takes care of all, accepts and holds it and gets rid of it, then the next layer of 10 come up. Okay? Now you have a new set of 10. Okay? Only one primary. You can only have one primary at a time. So where'd that second primary come from? Well, if the first layer was taken care of properly because you adjusted the primary and the body got rid of it, now the next layer comes up. That's called retracing. And the whole concept of that has been lost because nobody now teaches you that there's a primary and secondaries. They tell you that they're all subluxations and all subluxations are created equal. That's not true. So what happens when you adjust a secondary subluxation? You make the primary stronger. Why? Because it's the secondaries that are created as compensatory corrections for the primary. We are self-healing organisms. Again, it would take me a couple hours to give you the full picture, and it wouldn't be appropriate. I'm answering the question about a pattern. But listen to this. This is the most important part of the whole thing. You cannot have an office offering lifetime chiropractic care if your patients don't retrace. In other words, a pattern is the patient doesn't retrace. A pattern is you stay in that layer and you never get out of it. Well, you never will even if you adjust the primary, but in the same visit, you adjust the secondary or tertiary. Wednesday, when that patient comes back, you can have that same primary and the same secondaries. By the way, 80% of all secondary subluxations are caused by Lovett reactors, or Lovett brother, it depends what school you went to, the Lovett system. The remaining, not the remaining, and about 15% of the compensation is by pelvic rotation, okay? And in other words, PI ilium on one side and AS ilium on the other, okay? Again, this is all taught you in school, but what they forgot to continue teaching is that every subluxation is different from each other. It's not that all subluxations are the same. A primary subluxation can only be caused by the three causes of subluxation. Secondary and tertiary subluxations, by definition, are only caused by the fact there's a primary, and the Lovett reactors create those to mitigate the primary. Got it? Did I answer that person's question? You have to allow your patient, every time you adjust, the patient has to retrace, or you keep them in that pattern. That's where the pattern comes from. Now, the question was, are tonal models more better in that tonal models now won't create a pattern? No. A tonal model has nothing to do with whether you'll pattern a patient or not, or create patterns. Okay, what creates a pattern is by adjusting secondaries and tertiaries. If you never do that, your patients will retrace, and guess what? They won't plateau. So your retention is going to be really high. And if you want lifetime care in your office, if you want to achieve that, introduce that understanding and only adjust primaries. So, and how do you know whether this subluxation is a primary versus a secondary? Then we'll have to get into technique to explain that, okay? And we don't have time for that. Yes.
Holder, how would you explain the process by which physical, emotional, or chemical overload creates a primary subluxation?
Okay. Well, I'm sourcing right now in the green books to give you a green book answer, because again, if I give you the answer, I'll miss my ship. I'm even going to use the same green book, The Science of Chiropractic, 1920, B.J. Palmer. He goes on to say in this section, he's actually talking about noxious habits. They didn't have the word, the disease of addiction or addiction diseases. In BJ's day, it was called noxious habit. Same thing though. Remember, vocabulary words change as time moves on. So a noxious habit in this section of that book is actually on cigarette smoking, but believe it or not, BJ doesn't even tell you it's a cigarette. It's typical of BJ, he writes in like a code. Okay, I mean, you really have to understand what the hell he's talking about, because, I mean, you have to read it 30 times before you get it. But that was his style. He goes on to say that an individual with a noxious habit, okay, on intermittent use, I'm trying to remember the words, on intermittent use, from time to time, the body will expel the intruder. This is a quote. The body will expel the intruder. To me, and I understand BJ's language, what he's saying is, and also the other words, is the body will make certain accommodating changes because of the noxious habit to kick out this intruder. And of course, talking about the smoking of cigarettes. He says, however, the noxious habit, this is sort of my own words. He now says, but this noxious habit becoming a habit will not allow the innate of that person's body to expel the intruder. Can't do it anymore. And then it says, it will do the next best thing. Blow a primary. It's going to create a subluxation. In other words, in this case, this is chemical cause. All right, so you have to stop it. Wait. Initially, intermittently smoking, okay, the body's able to expel the intruder. But when it becomes a habit, it can't do it anymore. And I was wondering when I was looking at that many years ago, it's why? Then I understood, because the person keeps smoking. It wasn't so much the person inhaled the cigarette smoke or smoked a cigarette. But now if it becomes habitual and you're doing it, you know, almost every moment of every day or every hour, you know, then the body cannot expel the intruder, and says it does the next best thing. It creates a primary subluxation. Okay, so that would be the same thing as far as stress or emotion. In other words, that's the answer for to Eddie's question about chemical. Mental would be, oh, and by the way, when we talk about pain, we have to stop thinking about physical pain. Chiropractors, the minute they hear the word pain, or your patients hear pain, they only think of one thing, physical pain. That's the least cause of pain. The most constant, most common is worser, you like that English, it's worser than physical pain, is emotional pain. So you lose your car keys, you're not suffering from depressions, but you're depressed till you find them, and then you're happy. Okay, but if it keeps on and on and on, like any habitual habit, okay, then it's too much for the body to do anything else. It's going to blow a primary. And these things are good. The subluxations are good for you. The primary subluxation is your best friend, okay, because it's protecting the wiring system, and your entire neurophysiology, okay, would self-destruct if it wasn't for that circuit breaker. And think of a circuit, you know what a circuit breaker is? You know all circuit breakers have a spinous process. And all the circuit breakers on your fuse box should be going in this direction, right? And when there's an overload, some mental, chemical, or physical overcompensate, in other words, that the fuse box can't compensate for. It can compensate, this particular one can compensate 5 amps. This one over here may be 20 amps. Each one has a limit. In the 33 principles of chiropractic, we have limitations of matter. So if this 20 amp circuit breaker can handle 20 amps and a 10 amp physical, mental, or chemical thing happens, it's going to be fine. But if a whopper, a big bad neurological insult, chemical, mental, or physical, any neurological insult, we give them terms, physical, mental, chemical, but they're really all the same. They're neurological insult. More limitations of matter, more than the body can safely handle. Then the spinous process is going to go over to this side. So it's sort of like when you look at your fuse box, normally they're all like, you know, left spinuses, and if there's a problem, there'll be a right spinus. So what do you do? What do you do to mitigate that, to restore that? You take your finger and you adjust the spinus on the circuit breaker, and you reset it. Everyone in this room and everyone on the planet has different thresholds of what can blow a primary. If somebody's very emotionally sensitive, what Eddie's asking, if somebody's very emotionally sensitive, you know what? They'll easily blow a primary subluxation just because they lost their car keys, okay? Most people won't. But I have good news. The 3 causes of subluxation that are very well understood. Thousands of subluxations a day your body's creating. Everyone in here, even as I speak, They're ships passing in the night. Our body is creating subluxations like crazy. But the body that giveth the subluxation also taketh away. 98% of them. It's only the bigger, badder, worser ones that are beyond the limitations of matter. I'll give you an example. Emotionally. Mary, you're not holding your adjustments. What's going on in your life? Well, the IRS just seized all my money from the bank. And let me see what else. Oh, my husband ran off with my best girlfriend. What else? Oh, yeah, my grandmother died in childbirth this morning. I mean, you get to a certain point where the body has to blow a primary subluxation. They're your friends. They're good. What happens is then the body taketh away. It doesn't need a chiropractor. So you'd have to ask yourself, since we're self-healing organisms, why did God make chiropractors in the first place? If the body creates subluxations and takes them away with the compensatory mechanisms, okay, that we're all taught in school, then why chiropractors? For limitations of matter. It's when it gets to a point where in that particular person may have a weakness for emotional, and this person over here may have a weakness in physical, okay, and this person over here might have a weakness in chemical, okay. But the nervous system is transmitting intelligence, not through polarization and repolarization, by use of the Morse code of the tonal model. The tonal model is that form of intelligence that travels throughout the trillions of cells in the body, where we first came in and we asked the question, and I'll answer it now, very simply. You have trillions of cells in the body and only a few thousand nerves. How is it possible that the nervous system controls and coordinates all of the trillions of cells when there are very few nerves available? The neurotransmitters that are released based on correct Hertz frequency and received at the receptor site, and there's reward. When something to interfere with that normal Hertz frequency takes place, which would be chemical, mental, or physical, then you blow a primary subluxation. And again, almost all of these the body takes care of without a chiropractor. The chiropractors are necessary for the ones that are beyond the body's ability to self-heal or control. Yes?
We're running out of time, and we have two good questions that I think, I trust, I believe you can answer.
All right, remember, I want to spend 5 minutes on the brain reward cascade. We promised that.
Okay.
How long did it take to get to the ship? Okay, what time is it here?
6.
Oh! They close the door at 7. Hey, they close the door at 7:30.
It's crazy.
But,
It's Sunday on holiday. It's Sunday on holiday. It's 4 ships, and a lot of people.
Eddie,
Yes.
but I can stay with Eddie if anything's on.
That's what we're trying to avoid. That's what we're trying to avoid.
No. We're going to leave. I'm not going to leave it up to the half an hour. Okay. We'll leave 33 minutes.
Okay, two questions. Two questions.
Yes.
Briefly, so we can go to the brain reward cascade.
Yes.
One question is, how can I turn Thompson and Gunstead or other techniques into how can we upgrade them?
A nonlinear tonal model. Second century, very, very simple. We actually, and again, we keep going back to technique. You know, I love technique. I teach technique, but that might take too much time. Look, if you limit yourself to learning how to identify a primary, and it's a neurological exam, everybody, the only way to determine the difference between a primary, secondary, tertiary subluxation is through a neurological exam called the FLLR, the functional leg length reflex. That is not the leg check that you've been using or that you know about. Okay? We are using the Achilles deep tendon reflex for the FLR. The FLR has two indicates two things. It will determine what side your primary is listed on. And the other thing is, it will tell you when you have a primary subluxation. It will tell you when you have located a secondary or tertiary. Objectively, and it's a neurological exam. The functional leg length reflex is not trying to make the legs even. If you make the legs even, which they call balanced, you've harmed the patient. There's only three things that can make the legs perfectly even functionally for an extended period of time. Second stage of rigor mortis, that doesn't sound like balance to me. Chemically controlled state of coma, known as general anesthesia. And the third is if you adjust secondaries and tertiaries. So since there are no techniques that bother to teach you how to differentiate primary from a secondary, you're adjusting secondaries, with sincerity. And that's why you have created a pattern in your patient. Now they can no longer retrace. And so forget lifetime care. Depending on how good of a salesman or saleswoman you are, you can keep them for maybe 40 visits. That's what the research says. Okay. To be able to prove to yourself or anybody if you're providing lifetime care is after you're in practice more than 3 or 4 years, look at Monday's appointment book and see who is in the appointment book on Monday who was in your first year of practice, other than your mother. Okay, and you'll find probably nobody. So how are you delivering lifetime care? Patients plateau and don't come back because you know what? Eventually they aren't getting anything. They're not getting a bang for their buck anymore. And they plateau. So I don't know what part of the question they're looking for other than what I just said.
I think so. I think you answered the question.
Okay.
I believe you answered the question.
All right.
And I think the other question is...
Well, Eddie, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
The other question is, how do we learn how to detect primary subluxations? Not how, but how do we learn?
Oh, okay. Well, see, I'm trying to stay away from promoting my own work. This talk is supposed to be about pure education, understanding the tonal model, and to catch yourself from using, words in a sentence that you really don't have a clue what's going on. But this twice now, I'm asked essentially the same question. Right now, the only model that is teaching, or it's an educational seminar on how to do that, on how to know that it's a primary or secondary, and to avoid patterns. That upgrade that was that second century nonlinear tonal model would be torque release technique, and unfortunately, it's because I don't know of any other upgrade right now. You see, the question was, if I want to continue using Gonstead, how can I upgrade it to where I'm only going to be adjusting primaries and still do Gonstead? Okay, you would have to learn torque release, not torque release technique, but torque release model. We call it torque release technique. I don't care what technique you use. I want you to be able to not pattern your patients and get lifetime care and serve more people and be able to see more patients in your practice without limitation of time. All right. There's no reason why you can't see 60 patients an hour with this upgrade.
Thank you, Doc. I think we're running out of we run out of time. I mean, 6:06. You wanna give it a few minutes to the brain reward? Eddie, when do we go? When do you think we should go to the?
It won't take an hour.
Anytime now.
Yeah, let's leave at least an hour to get to the ship, right? Okay, so that would give me another maybe 10, 15 minutes. So
okay,
let's go up here, because what I'd like to share with you is the brain reward cascade. And the reason is because now we'll have a practical application for the tonal model. In other words, let's see it in action. You see, what I didn't share with you is one of the benefits of the tonal model, not only the creation of chiropractic, but state of well-being and human potential. I said at the beginning that chiropractic doesn't treat a condition, symptom, or disease. So when we adjust the subluxation, we only get one outcome. And what is that? State of well-being and human potential. Remember, I said reward doesn't mean something extra, a reward that you're getting more than something good. Reward is the minimum, just normal. Well, state of well-being, that's normal. But to improve state of well-being and human potential, which is a lifetime care initiative, depends on everything we talked about so far, specifically the tonal model. The leading cause of subluxation is mental, not physical. Stop selling mattresses and teaching people how to lift and bend. There's nothing wrong with having musculoskeletal issues in your practice, but that's the smallest scope of practice. That's the smallest part of chiropractic. Because physical cause, there's three causes. Physical is one of the three. That's the least cause of subluxation. People aren't going around having physical cause of subluxation every second of every moment, but mentally they are. And chemically they are, because you're in a chemical environment. So why don't you focus on what occurs more often and is the most important? And the biggest scope of practice is state of well-being and human potential. So we're talking about mental and chemical causes of subluxation, not physical. We're always going to get those. You don't have to worry about that. But who knows about the mental and the chemical? Almost none of your patients do. You know why? Because you didn't tell them about it. So let me show you so that you understand what's going on. Remember, all nerve tissue is identified in histology or by histology and has a specific Hertz frequency. So let's look at the limbic system of the brain, which is your seat of emotions, your love, hate, anger, joy, sadness, happiness, your decision making based on what mood you're in at the time. It's almost what life is all about. Now, life is much more about God and our purpose for being here and free choice. But when we talk about clinically in healthcare, we're talking about this. We're talking about how we feel, our state of well-being, and our human potential, mental and chemical. So the limbic system are made up of several tissues, different nerve tissues that accomplish that. That's why it's called a system. There's over 7 different nerve tissues that make up the limbic system. Some of them are mentioned here, okay? The most important one is not. I don't know why it's not here. We had to find this before we gave the lecture today. We didn't have much time. We're talking about anterior and posterior hypothalamus. Well, those are 2 tissues that make up the limbic system. They're very important, okay? They're not here. But in this general area would be the anterior and posterior hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus itself produces some chemicals. Let's say tryptophan. We've heard of tryptophan, right? Okay. So tryptophan is manufactured and produced in the hypothalamus, and it's going to become a neurotransmitter. So it's issued out from the cells. The minute it appears, and remember, brain reward cascade. Cascade means linear, like dominoes. If one is out of place, there'll be no reward. The last domino won't fall. And reward, a state of well-being and human potential. So let's go to the hypothalamus. We now see it has produced tryptophan. The body now will metabolize the tryptophan to 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, which everybody says you should get in the health food store. It's a waste of money. It's the burnt up ashes of tryptophan. Do not go out and purchase it. Okay. The body produces it by metabolizing tryptophan. So once the 5-hydroxytryptophan is manifest, is left over, okay, that stimulates the release of the next neurotransmitter, which we're going to name by the amino acid, the name of the amino acid, the molecule on top. Okay, so we go tryptophan to 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, now to 5-TP, and that's serotonin. 5-HTP to 5-TP, serotonin. Now, serotonin, when it comes out, interstitially, it now is going to stimulate the next domino called methionine. It's a methionine and enkephalin, okay, a neurotransmitter. So we're done. We're done with the hypothalamus. So let's just put it over here on the back shelf for a while. We'll come back to it later. Now, there are these two footballs here, okay, or circles, and a very large one here. Let's talk about the ventral tegmental, this little one here, green one. It's like a football. It's not a perfect circle. It produces GABA, GABA, GABA-aminobutyric acid. They want to sell you that in the health food store too. And they tell you it's a B vitamin. It's not a B vitamin, and you don't buy it. Stay away from it, okay? Although it's important within the body, if you know somebody that has a problem with drugs or alcohol, if they're on GABA, GABA-aminobutyric acid, they're going to relapse, okay? It's not your friend, okay? It's activated by the pineal gland, and that's another story, okay? So right here, that little green thing is producing an unlimited amount of GABA. Whoa! As in GABAergic. There's two pathways in the brain, essentially. There's dopaminergic and GABAergic. Okay? If you have too much GABA, you're going to be walking around very depressed. Okay? So, again, if this is left not dealt with, unencumbered, it'll overproduce GABA. Okay? Now, this GABA competes with dopamine, because this circle, the nucleus accumbens, produces, if you don't do anything about it, produces an unlimited amount of dopamine. Unbelievable amount. Okay, so if you have too much dopamine, you're going to run picking daisies, That means you're manic. GABA, depressed. Dopamine, manic. Okay, well, there's an innate intelligence, okay, the mind, the soul, the spirit, nature, intuition, as I prefer to name it, the innate intelligence, okay, is tonal. These tissues, believe it or not, because of the Morse code system, are smart enough to know how to balance themselves unless there's nerve interference. This is as tonal as you get. You've heard of bipolar, manic depression. So, I mean, that's just a basic brain. You may be neutral and just a normal state of well-being. You may be a little depressed. You may be a little hyper or, manic. Okay. What balances it? Do antidepressants do that? They're supposed to, but you realize that since we're dealing with a linear system of dominoes, if one doesn't fall, suicide is often a choice. You have no idea. You can't comprehend the pain, the emotional pain that can be reached within the limbic system. And I hope you never will. So now what happens? Remember the methionine and enkephalin we put on the back shelf? This methionine and enkephalin is part of that Morse code system. Listen carefully. The methionine and enkephalin leaves the hypothalamus. This is the first time we're leaving the hypothalamus. And it blocks the competition of the GABA to the dopamine. If I didn't tell you, I'll say it now. GABA competes with dopamine. It destroys it. So if you have too much GABA, you're going to be depressed. If you don't have enough GABA, okay, then you're going to have too much dopamine, and you're going to be a wild, crazy guy. Okay. Is there some vocabulary word of the nervous system? Candace Pert, ever heard of her? Brilliant researcher. She discovered the opiate receptor. She has written so much research, and actually she almost got the Nobel Prize, then she died. She says that these neurotransmitters are the vocabulary words of the nervous system. If that's the case, then the tonal model is the vocabulary, or the vocabulary words of your entire nervous system. So in other words, we're all in agreement there. And in medical school, they tell you the same thing. So now let me show you what's normal. Just the right amount of methionine and enkephalin leaves the hypothalamus and stops the GABA from only producing the right amount to compete with the dopamine so you don't have too much. And then the dopamine then goes to the amygdala. And when it gets there, you feel normal, you feel good. That's a normal state of well-being and human potential. And all of this is happening by virtue of the vocabulary words to run the nervous system and all the tissues and cells in the body by this Morse code system we call the tonal model. Can you imagine you didn't graduate the 8th grade? It's 1880 to 1895, and this guy figures this all out without any equipment, doesn't know the numbers, the hertz frequency, but he envisioned it. He created it in his mind. And that's what was behind the intent and visualization of the first adjustment. And hence why he wrote on the cover plate of his first book, Founded on Tone. By the way, the hippocampus plays a role, but that would be for norepinephrine and GABA A fibers. Okay, I want to tell you something that's even going to excite you more, and then we're done. Even today, everybody thinks the limbic system is the one that sits on the sphenoid. By the way, okay, there's a pituitary here. See the pituitary? This is the sphenoid bone. That's the sola turcica. Sphenoid used to be called C1 prior to Gray's Anatomy for hundreds of years, because it is a true vertebrae. And it's one of the 22 cranial bones. Okay, so we called it the seat of emotions because sola turcica means saddle or seat. You all heard that. It's the limbic system. Guess what was discovered in 1988 by Candace Pert and delivered it before the New York Academy of Sciences on oncogenesis and tumor growth? She discovered that there's more of the tissues of the limbic system. These tissues make up and define the limbic system in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord than in the brain. There's more limbic system, there's more amygdala tissue, there's more limbic system tissue in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord than there ever was in the brain. And there have been studies since 1988 that confirm her discovery. And chiropractic doesn't know about it? Do you know all the remarkable outcomes and improvement in patients on how they feel and their emotions, their state of well-being and human potential, that the limbic system is as much, if not more so, in the